Have you ever felt like you've just lost all hope in life? Well, if you have, you know that that's a dark place to be. Human beings need hope to live as much as we need food or water. So when Solomon writes in Proverbs 13:12, hope deferred makes the heart sick, he's tapping into something that we've all probably felt in our life, that deep sorrow that occurs when we experience the tragedies of a fallen world. A Christian counselor once said that depression is when a deeply desired goal or a dream becomes unattainable. Maybe you felt that. But Proverbs gives us hope. Hope for all of us who feel burdened with heart sickness. A desire fulfilled is a tree of life. It's what it says. Proverbs reminds us that in the end, the promises of God will overcome all the sadnesses that we encounter in this life, that the righteous will find satisfaction, joy, and fulfillment, that all that the first Adam lost, the tree of life, communion with God, a world of peace, all that he lost at the fall will be reclaimed by the second Adam, Christ. He redeems what was lost and paves the way for us to find ultimate peace and satisfaction. That's the promise to the heartsick Christian, that a tree of life awaits in the future. But wisdom is here in the present as we trudge through life with all of its trials and difficulties. It's here as a guide for us, to lead us every step of the way until we come to our final home. This is Understanding Proverbs. Since we're in a more segmented section of Proverbs, I'm going to provide just a brief running commentary through chapters 13 to 15. And as I'm going through these chapters, I encourage you to take note of any Proverbs that grab your interest and make note of them and meditate on them. Take some time throughout your day to think through these words and see if any insights come to the surface. So I'm going to loosely follow an outline taken from George Schwab's commentary on Proverbs, and I'm going to just loosely follow it to help frame what we're going to talk about. So in chapter 13, we start in the first 8 verses with a discussion that centers around appetites. Proverbs often uses our bodily experiences to illustrate spiritual truths. So in verse 2, from the fruit of his mouth a man eats what is good, but the desire of the treacherous is for violence. So a wise man's words possess this life-sustaining quality that fills and satisfies and brings peace and joy, not just to himself, but to all others. But the treacherous man, the wicked man, he spews out violence, literally outrage. He lacks prudence with his words. He doesn't guard his lips like the righteous man, but he just continually speaks folly, aggressively and loudly, and it ends up bringing ruin to his life. Maybe you've met people like this. He's also lazy. He's a sluggard. He craves and he craves. He's got this insatiable appetite, but no work ethic. He doesn't want to put in the labor required to provide for himself. So he never finds satisfaction, and he never finds his cravings fulfilled. But the diligent worker who gets up every day, who works, who has that work ethic, finds an abundance of provision. Now, where do our appetites come from? Well, largely they're formed in our upbringing. Anytime that you see a wise son, you're looking at the product of a good father's instruction. But a scoffer is somebody who either lacked a father figure, or more likely, he refused to listen to his father. His father gives him perhaps wise instruction, and he scoffs. He looks down on it. He dismisses it as something that is foolish and irrational. Because of that, he's malformed. He's on the path to destruction. The righteous son, on the other hand, he loves righteousness. He craves that. That's his great desire. And he hates falsehood as a result. And that keeps him blameless and off the path of destruction. But again, the wicked son, he eats up shame. His mouth consumes shame and disgrace, and he will end up finding himself overthrown by his own folly and sin. So this contrast is meant to show us, again, the path of the righteous and the wicked, the path of the foolish and the wise. The foolish man is obsessed with image. He will pretend to be rich while possessing nothing. He's the guy that, rents out a sports car and jewelry with money he doesn't actually have to show it off on social media. he's just a fool. But the wise son, he exercises prudence. He's not flaunting his wealth. In fact, he carries himself with great humility. There's also a practical reason. Riches can also serve as a liability. People might hold you ransom, but nobody bothers a poor person. There's no leverage you can have against a poor person. And so there's some realities that come with riches that maybe the foolish person is not completely aware of. The next section, in verses 9 to 14 of chapter 13, focuses on the need to heed advice. And this is touched on in the prior section. The fool is marked by his lack of humility and his ridiculous pride. He just thinks that he knows it all. The righteous, though, they invest in wisdom by listening to others, and they find joy. But the wicked ignore the counsel of others, and they just cause nothing but strife. Maybe you know people who, they're always about their own opinion. They don't care if they're causing all this division and chaos. They just love to hear the sound of their own voice. And they're investing in something that is ultimately foolish. And this extends to the way that they view money. They don't listen to the warnings about the perils of rapid wealth gain. Think about how many countless stories there are about lottery winners who, in a few short months, are completely bankrupt. And it's meant to show that the diligent person who saves and invests ultimately does more to preserve his wealth and will probably have more wealth in the end than the fool who gains rapid wealth. Wise teachers are a fountain of life and reward, but the fool, because he thinks he knows better, ignores that reward. He turns away. He despises God's commands, and in the end, he finds ruin. He doesn't realize the opportunity and the blessing that he is forfeiting by his hard-heartedness and his stubbornness. We're going to dive a little bit more into the fool in verses 15 to 20. The proof's in the pudding for both the wise and the fool. A man of wisdom gains a hearing from others. He gains favor from others. They see the fruit of his choices. Honestly, they just see his life just kind of works. And so they go, well, this guy probably knows what he's talking about. But the fool, his foolish life and his poor decisions just broadcast his stupidity to everybody. He's an unreliable messenger, and that gets him in trouble. He ignores the financial advice of others, and he falls into poverty. His moral compass is twisted so that he finds evil sweet and righteousness an abomination. This is not a guy you want to spend time with, much less learn from. But the wise, in verses 20 to 25, are the people that you want to spend time with. In fact, if you spend time with the wise, you'll become wise. And the flip is true as well. You spend time with fools, you're going to turn out to be a fool. The company we keep goes a long way in shaping our character. And so if you keep company with the wise, you'll be rewarded with a good life. You're going to make wise decisions. You're going to have that positive peer pressure. You're going to learn to give your children an inheritance, right? Because what is an inheritance? It's thinking about the future. It's not being ensnared by the present. It's being able to forego instant gratification for the good of the future, not just for yourself, but more importantly for others. And you trust that in the end, the wealth of the wicked is going to flow to the righteous. Even if in the present it seems like the wicked are prospering, there is this hope of final deliverance, that God is going to set all things right. And that is actually part of the theology of leaving an inheritance, that you trust God, not just with your present, but with your future, that he is wise, good, and most importantly, just. The wise are marked by seeing beyond temporary displeasure and pain to the fruit of righteousness that will come. If you think about this famous passage, whoever spares the rod hates his son, but he who loves him is diligent to discipline him. Verse 24. I think this is very clearly talking about some kind of physical discipline. And this might sound really merciless or mean in our day, but I think there is some wisdom to this. Not just some, there's a lot of wisdom to this. Love is willing to inflict temporary pain in order to bring about lasting good. And actually, discipline is a way of showing attention. Just as our Heavenly Father shows his attention to us and his care to us through his discipline, that's the model for how you attend to your children in the same way. That you don't want to be a negligent father or mother. You want them to know that you are invested in them growing in righteousness, that you want their good more than they do. And sometimes that means that you're going to have to exercise parental discipline. But in the end, it's going to end up in joy. Because those who are enslaved by their lusts and appetites never actually find satisfaction. But if you're disciplined by righteousness, you become grateful. You become somebody who has self-control and humility and strength and confidence. The kid who always gets what he wants never really gets what he wants. He never finds fulfillment. He's just somebody who whines and nobody likes him. But the child who is trained by discipline ends up reaping the benefits later on in life. And this brings us to chapter 14. We get introduced to two houses. Think about how prevalent the theme of households is throughout Proverbs. Think about the house of the woman of folly, the house of the adulterous woman, the house of the wise woman, all these different themes. And we get a little bit of an echo of that in these first 9 verses. The wise woman builds her house. The foolish woman tears down her own house. So foolishness is fundamentally self-destructive. There's no integrity or wholeness in the house of folly, only fluctuating passions, untethered by the fear of God. The idea of integrity, again, is oneness. You're not divided in your allegiances. You are wholly devoted to God. But when you lack integrity, you're divided. You're captured by your lusts and whatever fleeting pleasures come by your way. So those who live in the house of folly, they don't pay attention to consequences, especially the consequences of their words. And eventually they pay for those foolish choices of words. Maybe, again, you've experienced this in your life. They can't see past their laziness, the power and potential of an oxen who can bring about abundant crops. All they see is the nuisance of having to clean a manger, right? They don't see the possibilities that this ox, though it makes a mess, is going to provide for your whole family. But again, they're just concerned about their convenience. They don't see the potential and the power right in front of them. Lying becomes a way of life in the house of folly. As a result, they're actually dimmed in their ability to hear truth or wisdom. There's this interesting way in which if you continue to lie, you become more of a liar, and that actually corrupts who you are. You actually become self-deceptive. It actually distorts the way you view yourself, others, and the world. And so not only do you not want to be this person, you want to get as far away from this person as possible. They have no wisdom to offer you. The house of wisdom judges the world properly because they see properly. They have moral vision, and they can chart out a path of success. But again, the fool can't see straight. He's self-deceived. And not only is he self-deceived, but he mocks the guilt offering. Why does he mock the guilt offering and all the sacrifices that Israel was required to give? Because sin's just a joke to him. Nothing's sacred to him. Life is weightless. He has no gravity. And so his life spirals out of control. And ultimately, the house of the wicked will end in destruction, whereas the righteous will flourish. But again, the fool is so short-sighted that he can't see that. And this leads to the second section in chapter 14, verses 10 to 27, about how looks can be deceiving. The fool often lacks perception. He goes with the initial glance at reality that he makes, and he doesn't really probe any deeper. And so he misses some of the nuances of life. For example, in verse 10, the heart knows its own bitterness, and no stranger shares its joy. It's a very interesting observation. The way that people present and how they are actually doing don't always coincide. And there's a fundamental loneliness to the human experience. You can only really know your own sorrows. But a fool can't really see the depth of life in that way. He sees a way that seems good to him, but it leads to death. Think about how the ignorant youth in earlier chapters gets seduced into the home of the adulterous woman, and she just leads right to the grave. Well, that youth thinks that he's going for a good time. He thinks that he's seeking his own good. But in the end, he realizes, wow, I actually had no idea what I wanted, or what I wanted was so twisted that it ended up going against my self-interest. It's ultimately self-destructive. Now, a person who laughs may do so in order to conceal their deep sorrow. A person who's joyful may just have grief right around the corner. Again, there's this complexity of life that Proverbs brings to the forefront. Laughter may conceal a deep ache. That's a pretty profound sentence. Sometimes it's like when people say you laugh just to stop from crying. Well, Proverbs is familiar with that reality. So life's a little bit more complicated than we might think at first glance. But in the end, people will reap what they sow. The righteous will reap the fruit of righteousness, and the wicked will reap the fruit of wickedness. Therefore, don't believe everything at first glance, but give thought to your steps. Avoid reckless and careless action. The fool is the one who thrives on impulsivity. He's got a quick temper. He's trigger happy. He makes foolish choices. But whatever temporary wins he gains in life, he never attains the crown of true knowledge given to the prudent. And ultimately, the evil will bow down before the gates of the righteous. That's the fundamental hope. And the Proverbs' vision of life is one saturated with God's presence, that God actually interacts with the world. He's dealing with people. He will rule justly. And the proud and arrogant look at that and say, no, he doesn't. I can live the way that I want. I can live based on my take of the world rather than God's take of the world. Now, there are a handful of further observations about life. The rich have many friends, the poor do not. Well, it seems pretty obvious. But if you press deeper in that reality, the next verse makes sense. That generosity to the poor is a reflection of God's generosity to us. In fact, if you are not generous to the poor, you're actually insulting their maker, because we ourselves are dependent upon God, just as the poor are dependent upon us. And so there's a blessing that attends to those who are virtuous and manifest love toward the poor. Both the fool and the wise make plans, but the plans of the wise find steadfast love and faithfulness. Fools love to talk a big game, but never make a profit because they refuse to work. But the wise, they get wealthy through wisdom. The wise have confidence because they fear God, just like a child fears his father, not out of terror, but a reverence for his power and protection. And if you go against the will of God, if you go against God himself, you're only going to find death. But those in his care receive a fountain of life. This next section in 14, verses 28 to 35, stress the royalty of wisdom, which is a fitting theme when you consider the author, who's a king. Through wisdom, kings reign and bless their people. A king without a kingdom is pitiful, but one with a flourishing nation finds glory. A king's wise rule begins with his own self-rule. He's got to master his own emotions, his anger and his envy that rots his bones. He's got to get rid of that so that he could exercise great understanding and rule. He's got to have a tranquil heart. He can't be thrown off by the obstacles in his way. And a king who masters himself gives life to his subjects. He's got to be a man of justice. He's generous to the poor, again, because they bear the image of their creator. And he honors the Lord. He internalizes wisdom. It rests in him. Think about that. It's something that's actually part of who he is. Even though he's surrounded by fools, he himself is wise. He's characterized by it. And that exalts a nation, and it saves from death. The moral character of a nation far outstrips in importance any cultural, economic, or military power. And a wise king recognizes that the moral character of a nation is the most important thing, because all nations are before the face of God. So the wise king also acts favorably to those who are loyal to him and faithful to him, but he's got gravity and strength. He's not afraid to punish those who try to swindle him. He's not a pushover, but a confident ruler whose wisdom allows him to carry weight with his actions and to rule justly and righteously. We have in chapter 15 some more fatherly wisdom. It's just an assortment of different tidbits of righteous living. The righteous and the wise understand the potency of words. If you have a soft answer, you can de-escalate a situation, and you can be a tree of life that brings life and peace to others. His tongue commends knowledge. He lives with an awareness that the eyes of the Lord are in every place, keeping watch on the evil and the good. By contrast, the fool instigates more conflict. He's got harsh words. He just pours out foolish talk, and he lives without regard for God's justice. And you can see this because he doesn't regard his own father's instruction. Again, that theme comes back. The lack of teachability of the fool is a really bad trait to have because it cuts him off from the treasures that the righteous will inherit, and it leaves him with nothing but trouble. Now, both the wise man and the fool are evangelists. The wise man spreads knowledge, but the fool spreads foolishness. And his wicked behavior taints everything in his life, including his religious activities. Right? His sacrifices become an abomination to the Lord. He finds no audience with God in his prayers. Think about how Jesus rebukes the Pharisees because they're concerned about external purity at the expense of internal righteousness. They pray to be seen and win the praise of men. And Proverbs here is saying God knows all of that. He knows your heart. Your hearts are exposed before him. He even talks about how Sheol and Abaddon, the realm of death, the grave, they can't hide their secrets from God. Why do you think you can? It's absolutely foolish. And if we spurn him, who wants to discipline us to keep on the path of life, if we turn away from that reproof and correction, we find death. Alistair Roberts, in his commentary on this, notes that scoffing is a defense mechanism against wisdom. Whenever a scoffer starts to feel the pull of wisdom, he makes light of it in order to escape its grasp. It's a way of avoiding the weightiness of what wisdom actually is. And this brings us to matters of the heart, verses 14 to 24 in chapter 15. The heart in Proverbs is the rudder of the ship of who we are. It steers every aspect of our life. When the heart is glad, the face expresses joy. When the heart is sorrowful, it weighs down every aspect of our body. A heart that loves knowledge drives the body to seek it, but the fool uses their mouth to consume folly. A good mood, a cheerful heart, is a continual feast of delight. But when you're suffering affliction, you don't have that feast. It's a feast of sorrows, maybe. And it's a difficult situation to be in. But it just shows that your internal disposition can affect every aspect of your life. It can also help you endure great difficulties, right? A heart that fears God will find contentment, even if they have little money. And they might even avoid some of the troubles that accompany wealth. A home that's filled with love, even if you just have a simple meal, is much more joyful than a lavish dinner with people you hate, right? Or if there's all kinds of family dysfunction. A heart that's slow to anger brings unity. It avoids contention, brings life. But the hot-tempered man inflames division. He makes things exponentially worse. And in all these scenarios, it starts with the internal life of the heart that shapes and colors our experience of life in profound ways and impacts the lives of others. A righteous heart is going to walk upright on level ground. Think about what level ground is. It's unobstructed. There's no hidden dangers. The sluggard, though, he makes his life more difficult. He's on a crooked path. He's lazy. He doesn't understand how to actually pursue the things that will give him joy. He doesn't handle his responsibilities, and he pays for it in the end. Such a man embarrasses his mother, literally despises her. His behavior is so foolish that she's just ashamed. He has no prudence, no skill, but he doesn't care. He doesn't care because he finds joy in folly. And he does that precisely because he lacks sense. His foolishness just begets more foolishness. His crooked path takes him to the pit. He avoids the straight path that the wise man takes. Now, the fool believes himself to be wise in his own eyes. That's his fundamental problem. Again, he doesn't care about the counsel of others. He doesn't weigh his opinions against the more learned or wise. When he actually thinks about the right path, he doesn't consult a host of counselors. That's where success comes from, when it's not just you in your echo chamber, but you can hear the differing opinions of others, especially of those who know more than you do. But again, the fool doesn't care about that. He's wise in his own eyes. He wants to find success on his own terms. Finally, a wise man can read the room. He can use words to bring joy to others. Again, words are so central. Think about why James always talks about words and the tongue and how powerful it is. The person who's wise understands the moment. He deploys words to lift the spirits of the downtrodden. He's that friend who knows just what to say, and maybe more importantly, what not to say in any given circumstance. It's the kind of friend that you want to be. He combines his observation of how people relate with his knowledge of righteousness and the commands of God to bear life-giving fruit, the life-giving fruit of encouragement. That's something we can all do, to think about how can I use my words in such a way that it can lift the spirits of those who feel low. He's on the path upwards toward life. That's the righteous path. And at the same time, that distances him from the gates of Sheol, the gates of death. So the further you go towards righteousness, the further away from death you are. And that's a good thing. Finally, the righteousness of God, the end of chapter 15, verses 25 to 33. Big theme, God's righteousness always wins out in the end. Even though in the moment it might seem like it, he will bring justice for the widows. He will tear down the house of the proud. He knows the thoughts of the greedy, the wicked, and the unjust. And that's good because we want him to be paying attention to this world that's often filled with the greedy, the wicked, and the unjust. Proverbs, again, always sees practical living in light of God. We live our whole lives before a righteous God who brings blessing and cursing. So whatever the wicked may gain in the moment, we have to remember that God hears the prayers of the righteous. He gives good news to refresh weary bones. He feeds us wisdom that brings life-giving correction to keep us on the straight path. So if you ignore that wisdom, you ignore him. And if you ignore him, you ignore the very fountain of life you need to survive. You're going against the grain of reality. But if you lean in to wisdom and you build your lives upon that instruction, that foundation, and you fear the Lord with humility, you'll be exalted. You'll find honor. He will lift up the humble and give honor to those who listen, and he will bring his righteousness to bear. So much of wisdom requires faith, trusting that God really is in control, he really knows what's going on, and he will ensure that justice will be done.